What's up, YouTube? So today I wanted to make a guide on neutral game just because there's not actually any guides out that I've seen that like really go in depth about what neutral is, because it's one of like the touchier topics when it comes to fighting games. No one really has a good understanding of like what neutral is. There's like a lot of like differing opinions with it, so I'm here to kind of explain what neutral is, how to play it, exactly what it like consists of, and yeah. So the first thing about neutral game is that there are two jobs within neutral game. There's the attacker and the defender. And these two jobs are kind of just based off of whoever approaches first. So for example, if the sentinel's here and we're both in neutral, and I approach the sentinel here like this, I'm the attacker and the defender. If I'm here and the sentinel approaches me first, then I'm the defender and they're the attacker. It's just based off whoever approaches first. We'll get into the attacker job first. So the attacker's job is to threaten the defender with their hitboxes or threat zones, whatever you want to call them, and to understand what the opponent wants. Threatening your opponent will come down to your movement sequence, your speed, and what options you have in your character. And we'll get more into like that third one in a second here. So all attacks in this game have different sizes, ranges, and frame data, as you may know, and like pretty far range, while sword and light a bit stubbier, but a bit taller. So all attacks have different frame data, sizes, whatever. And these will kind of influence how you and your opponent will go about dealing with threats. So for example, if you were to be like fighting a bow player or something like that, so like let me make this a bow character, make it vector. So if you were fighting a bow player, a lot of the time you're going to be kind of wary of D-light, this bow D-light here. So normally if you kind of think that your opponent's going to go for a D-light, your reaction to that existing is going to be to jump above the D-light. Whether they actually do it or not and pull the trigger, you're going to be more prone to getting baited by dash cancels, because you're going to be expecting this to happen. So if they go like dash cancel and they have a movement sequence that actually looks like a bow D-light, you're going to jump and try to avoid that fake pseudo D-light. So the entire idea is that the types of attacks you have will influence how your opponent goes about reacting to these threats. But before we continue, it's important that you guys understand the difference between respecting and disrespecting. So if you don't know what those two terms are, I'll tell you right now. So respecting and neutral is when your opponent understands that you have a specific option and that you will use it when necessary. That's exactly what it means. So what that means is, like, if you were to approach someone like this, right now I'm in a position where I can hit sword endlight. So my opponent should know, okay, this guy can endlight me, let me get out the way. So that would be them respecting me. If they knew that I have endlight and that I will press it if they're there, they're going to get out the way. That means they respect the endlight. So disrespecting is the complete opposite of that. It's basically when your opponent does not care that you have an option because they know you won't use it. It's essentially like them calling your bluff. So now getting into the three most common things you'll notice as the attacker. The first thing is that people will move away and avoid your threat zones, which would be when they respect you. The second thing is people will attempt to attack you to disrupt your approach option, which is like kind of a middle ground of them respecting you enough to actually hit you and like not enough to move out the way. And you have people who will just stand still or like not really move out of the way, and that's people who do not respect you. So this is all within the context of you approach your opponent. So you approach your opponent and they back up because they understand, hey, I can get hit by sword down here, let me back up. Or even sword sidelight. Or maybe they jump. So that would be them respecting you. You have players that you approach them and they just attack you. And then you have players that you approach them and they just kind of don't move out the way of the threat zone. They kind of will just like dance with you, move left and right. Those are the three most common things that you'll notice in neutral as the attacker. So starting on the first thing that I explained, when they avoid your threat zones, to beat this option, you have to understand what attack you're threatening and where your opponent is trying to move to actually avoid that in the first place. So I like to think of playing neutral as the attacker as kind of like a conversation. So when you play a weapon like sword and you move towards your opponent, you're kind of like telling them, hey, I'm gonna hit you with endlight or sidelight, you should probably watch out. That's the entire idea with, like, behind your movement sequence and what that means. You're just telling your opponent with like a very telegraphed option, like, hey, I'm gonna hit you with endlight if you don't move out the way, so you should watch out. And your opponent will either watch out by avoiding that fake endlight that I haven't even thrown out yet, they might back up, or they'll just kind of sit still and not respect it. So they either have to watch out, or if they don't, they're just going to get hit by the attack that you're threatening in the first place, if you like notice that they're staying there whenever you threaten them. In this case, the opponent is watching out, which would mean you would read the jump or read them backing up with the overshoot. For example, like you would approach them, they back up because they're scared of the fact that your end light is in front of them. They back up, you overshoot that side light. But it only works because I'm moving in a way where end light actually would hit them if I did want to go for it. So the types of ways that your opponent will go about avoiding your attack depends on a couple of variables. So it can be things like how much stage control they have, what types of attack your weapon has, and like their damage, like if they're at kill percent. So we'll usually react like way more defensively than normally. So for example, we saw that like the vector player might back up if I approach them and I threaten an end light. Like this, they might back up. And that's because they already had the stage control previously. They were already here, so they had enough stage control to back up because they had room to go to the corner. But if they're already in the corner, they have one less option. He can't back up anymore. He's kind of backed himself all the way into a corner here. So now he might jump as a reaction, or he might cross up, go to the other side behind me. Very common options. So the best way to understand threats is to visualize the threat zones that you have. So you might be familiar with those threat zone images on Twitter that pop up occasionally, where it kind of just shows every single attack you could throw out, kind of like a huge bubble or shape around you. And whenever I play, I like to imagine or visualize all of those threat zones to better see like what attacks my opponent are scared of and what they don't respect. I kind of think about it as like laying invisible traps down that you can activate. For example, on Spear, when I'm this close to them, I'm within the end light range. So if I were to draw on the screen real quick, you would notice that like end light is kind of in front of the vector's face. I'm in end light position. The vector's in my threat zone for end light. I also have D light, which is kind of like above me, right above the vector. So I kind of cover in front of me and like diagonally in front of me on both sides. So then you also got side light, which is kind of like a mixture between end light and D light at the same time. So the shape of my threat zones is kind of like the shape of like two wings on like the sides of me, on the left and right side, like just two wings. So whenever my opponent, I kind of like notice that they're inside of like this wing shape that I'm visualizing, and they're like kind of sitting there and staying there, then I know, okay, I can hit them. They don't respect that option. Then eventually, once I start hitting them enough with enough end lights, they're going to start moving in a spot where I might not be able to cover them. So like, for example, I might move here and put them in this wing threat zone, but they might move out the way because they don't want to be here. I'm like, okay, this guy's backing up so I can overshoot. So going back to like the common things you'll see as a attacker, the second thing that we had was people who will try to disrupt your attacks. So it was when you approach someone like this, you put them in your threat zone and they attack you as a reaction. Whenever this happens, you could just shimmy them. You could just forward dash, back dash, punish whatever they do. You just kind of parry them how like you normally would, and it's like pretty simple. You want to think about this option as like more of a mix-up because it's not going to happen every single time usually. Like usually after enough times of just walking up and hitting them, walking up and hitting them over and over and over, I'll mix it up by shimmying and then coming in and hitting them. So another way of beating out players who attack whenever you approach them is to also just hit them before they can hit you. And this is where you can do stuff like you can stuff them out. If you're playing a weapon with like extremely like long range and high priority, then you can kind of just throw out an attack and it'll cover if they don't dodge, if they attack you at the same time, because they're just not going to be able to avoid it. Or on all weapons, you can weapon throw. Weapon throw is mainly used for this kind of purpose. Whenever you are kind of too scared to like really get in their face, but you still want to have a hitbox out, you can weapon throw. And the third most common option was people who just stand still. Whenever this happens, you just hit them with the attack that you were threatening in the first place. So after all of this, we now understand what I mean when I was saying that the attacker's job is to threaten the defender. But now you're probably wondering, okay, like what is the defender supposed to be doing then? So the defender's job is to successfully disrupt the opponent's approach and become the attacker eventually. So this kind of comes with understanding the timing and the option select of the attacker. It's pretty much a much simpler version of the attacker. The only difference is that like you're just trying to stop them from pressuring you instead of being the one doing the pressuring. So most ELO players will choose to automatically default to attacking kind of whenever they get within range of hitting you, without actually trying to understand where you want to go. So as the defender, backing away and like actually avoiding their threat zones actually works when you come across players that are always just attacking you without thinking about what like where they're going or what they're doing. But you just have to remember that this is like only a small piece of the puzzle that only works against that specific type of player. You don't want to always back up whenever you get approached because, like I said before, this only works against players who instantly attack you whenever they're near you. So once you run into players that actually understand their job as the attacker, you'll start getting tracked down and you'll kind of just be perpetually in disadvantage state whenever you start running away, like by default, whenever you get approached. This is when you should opt to actually disrupt them whenever they approach you. So this mainly works whenever your opponent's just kind of getting in your threat zone and not respecting the fact that you have options that can hit them. So for the Vector's perspective, they have a bow side light, So whenever I approach the vector player here, it would not be good for the vector to back up or jump off the map when they could just hit me. You know, they're so actionable. So I have to make sure that I respect the fact that they have a sidelight. So overall, the idea is just that you have to mix up between fighting back and like actually avoiding whatever attack you feel like they're going to threaten you with whenever they start to instantly attack. And that's why it's kind of important to understand their timing. But it's also important to understand the opponent's options. So for example, like Hammer doesn't have an anti-air. So if I was playing Hammer, so let me pick a Hammer character, Core. So Hammer has no anti-air. So this means like when the vector jumps, I don't really have like a button that can deal with that outside of NSIG. So it's much easier for this vector player to navigate and reposition themselves around Hammer because there's no way that I can really deal with them jumping away from me or jumping towards me or anywhere in the air. Understanding options is also important because it'll kind of get rid of like a lot of the fear that comes with playing the game. For example, like not only is it with like what character they're playing, but it's also about like what they personally like to be doing. So whenever you fight a bow player, you know, they have bow D-light. But just because they have access to bow D-light does not mean they're actually going to use it. A lot of bow players don't actually press it, and they just hope that you get scared of it and start jumping. And then when you start jumping, they punish it. But usually when you sit on the ground, they actually won't press the D-light. They won't pull the trigger. So it's up to you to like not respect certain attacks. You want to respect attacks that you know they're going to use and that they will use and they have been using. But some players have buttons that they just kind of never press. Like you'll fight orb players who'll never go for D-light. You'll fight guitar players that'll never go for N-light. You'll fight spear players that'll never do D-light, you know? So sometimes like you don't have to be scared of certain buttons that they're not already using. So with that being said, like whenever the defender successfully like interrupts the attacker, the amount of hit zone that they put the opponent in will result in the defender being in frame advantage. So what this means is like whenever you hit any attack, so I'm going to put this vector at white. So if I were to hit the vector player, the entire idea behind it is that now they're in hit stun and I have the option to instantly dash forward, and now I'm the attacker because I'm approaching first because they're already in hit stun, which allows the defender just to become the attacker and just kind of turn the tables. So kind of as recap, the entire idea is that the rules are decided by whoever approaches first. The attacker's job is to threaten with their hitboxes by making a realistic looking movement sequence, like approaching, seeing how they react to that threat, envisioning your threat zone, seeing like if they're actually going to move out the way or not, and just kind of visually confirming, okay, like is this guy, I'm like right here, I'm in sidelight on Hammer range, is he going to move around it or not? And then for the defender, your job is just to either outspace the opponent's attack by moving around if they are attacking instantly, like you know their rhythm, or you just hit them whenever they get into your bubble. So the last thing that I want to talk about was the importance of killing. So I know a lot of you guys probably struggle with confirming your kills whenever you're playing the game, and that comes from having a weak neutral. Players who can't find kills are players who are unable to hit their opponent when there's no one in any significant state. So it's important to be very good when it comes to navigating neutral, because that's what it's for. Finding kills in neutral is the same as doing anything else in neutral. It's just changing the attacks that you're actually using. So for example, when I went over how people can overshoot with the sword sidelight, like you approach them and they back up and you go for a sidelight, you can just replace that with a side sig. This is why I love to use sigs when I play Ryan. So like if I have this Roland at, you know, red, maybe 160, and I approach them like this, and maybe they like back up like this, I can overshoot and side sig them, and they'll die. Only just because I switched the attacks from going for normally like a sidelight to a side sig. So like that's how you'll find like a lot of your kills, especially like with cross ups. Like let's say your opponent's in the corner because they're scared of you. When you're in the corner here, you kind of have this like 50-50 of like, are they gonna cross up or not? You can kind of read cross ups like this by going towards them in the corner, kind of encouraging them. And I'll talk more about that in the next guide that I make about advantage state and edge guarding. But you can kind of condition people to either double down and kind of stay here, or get scared and go out. And you can kind of find kills from either of those scenarios as long as you like understand what's going on and you're the one initiating all the things that are happening. So having a better neutral game will allow you to easily confirm kills and like have many different ways of confirming kills. Another aspect of the game that I want to talk about when it comes to neutral game is whiffing. So whiffing is whenever your opponent just misses an attack. you or your opponent. So it's important to understand like what happens, because this happens a lot. You would be surprised how often this happens. You will usually miss at least like half of your attacks, or close to half of your attacks throughout the game, and so will your opponent. So it's important to understand what to do when your opponent misses an attack, because you cannot punish every attack. Sometimes your opponent will miss an attack and you're just not ready for it. So whenever that happens, like let's say we're both moving around and the Roland does dash G-Light off the map here, like the wrong way, or they sell it the wrong way and they mess up. Whenever this happens, you don't want to try to punish it. If you can't punish it and you know you can't punish it, don't try to. It's important that you get as much information as possible. Neutral game is about information and understanding your opponent. So whenever they miss a attack, you want to let them miss their attack, and you want to pressure them. You want to threaten them like how you normally would. So what you'll notice is that like a lot of players will miss a attack, and then if you get close to them after they miss the attack, to kind of act as if you're going to try to punish it, they'll do like a jump spot dodge, they'll back away, or they'll like miss a attack and do another one because they're scared. The entire idea is that like usually when someone misses a attack, they're going to do something else after. So it's up to you to like let them do that second thing so you can punish it. And then obviously you have those weird players who will miss a attack and kind of just like sit still, not do anything. Against guys like that, they just don't respect you, so you go and hit them. Anytime someone doesn't respect you, the option is usually just to hit them. So whenever someone misses a attack, that's another free way of finding a kill and getting extra damage. And like I said before, neutral is just about having multiple different ways of gathering information and multiple different ways of getting damage and confirming kills. So that's like another piece of information you can get from your opponent to, you know, win the game easier. Because now, like, if the opponent's at red and they miss an attack, now I have an answer. Like, if this Roland player is always attacking then doing another attack, if they're at kill percent, like 160 or 180, and they miss a D-Light, even though I can't punish this D-Light, I know what comes after. The end light comes after. Now I can punish that, and now they're dead. Just because I like took the time to observe what was happening. So the next important thing that I want to talk about was catching landings. Catching landings is something that's very like hard for a lot of like the newer players recently. So I wanted to kind of go over how exactly you're supposed to catch landings. So whenever your opponent starts jumping, you have to understand that they have to either land right now or later. That's all that matters. So what I mean by that is that whenever your opponent jumps like this, there's no rush. So you can either stay on the ground and just wait for them and just kind of move on the ground and track them, or you can jump towards them and threaten them, which works like a lot better on weapons with no anti-air, like hammer, sword, stuff like that. So usually when the opponent jumps, your first instinct should be to just kind of stay on the ground and observe them. You want to see how many times do they jump before they land. Do they use a dodge before they land? Do they land with the attack or not? You'll see a lot of players in Platinum do this kind of thing where they will fall with an arrow. So like they'll jump 3 times and like do a falling side air. So you want to ask yourself, like, are they landing aggressively or like kind of passively or defensively? Are they burning all of their jumps? Are they jumping one time? Are they like instantly falling to the ground? Do they burn their dodge like this before they land? Do they dodge and then attack after the dodge? You'll see a lot of that. People who will dodge and attack right after. So you have to make sure that you like are always observing like where they want to go and what they want. Sometimes when your opponent's at red, they might dodge or maybe jump around, but like they'll land in the corner. So it's important to understand like if they're bluffing or not. Some players will like jump over here, then dodge backwards and go back to the corner. So you have to kind of give yourself time to observe. But that's just one way about going about it. When you're playing weapons that are a bit weaker when it comes to like anti-airs, like sword, hammer, even like, you know, lance, sometimes you want to pressure them in the air. So if they're in the air like this, you can jump and match them horizontally like this to see if they move out the way. Because the entire idea is that like air game is the same as ground game. So the same way that you can get in like end light zone and make them move around, you can do the same thing in the air. If they're in the air, you can go to the air with them, and like now you guys are both like horizontally matched in the air like this. So I can side air him and he can side air me. So it's important for me to like check him to see, okay, we're both inside our range. Is he gonna go down or is he gonna go up? If he doesn't do either, he just gets hit by side air, and I just press side air and like pull the trigger and he gets hit by it. But if he actually respects my side air here, he's going to either jump above where this hider is going to be at, which means I could just go back to the ground and catch his landing, or he's just going to fall to the ground and I could just do fast false air. So whenever someone jumps, it's important that you take your time and you understand the pressure that you're trying to do. They have to land eventually. So when you jump towards them, you want to be like looking for maybe a fast fall, a jump, or a dodge. Forgot to mention that one. Some players might dodge whenever you match them in the air too. Even without matching them, if they're like this high up in the air, sometimes you could jump fast fall like this and kind of scare them with the spot dodge. Whenever someone's in the air, it's important that you focus on like pressuring them, taking your time, observing how many jumps they use usually, if they land with the attack or not, if they land away from you, or if like they're trying to land on top of you. All those kinds of things will help you, and that's another set of information that will allow you to get damage and get kills. So if your opponent's at kill percent and they start jumping, or they're somehow they ended up in the air, if you know that this guy is always gonna like dodge like this right before he lands, well, you can call his bluff and then read his dodge and come back with a D-Light recovery and get your kill confirmed. So now you have even more information. So now you have a way to kill him after he whiffs a attack. You have a way to build damage after he's in the air and he's jumping. You have a way to build damage and like when you're playing footsies with them. These are all different ways you can now like confidently be comfortable when you're playing neutral. So yeah, that's about it. That's kind of my take on neutral. And yeah, that's about it. Peace.